Hey man,
Hey, Eric.
how's everything?
Good. How's everything going with you?
Cool, cool. I like the new beer.
Yeah, it was
I thought you had the like.
I used to have the full beard. Just a summertime choice here. Things are pretty relaxed right here right now, so yeah, mustache for a little bit.
Cool.
Yeah.
So is everything okay over there?
Yeah, everything's been great. How about there?
Everything's good.
Good.
Yeah. Actually, one of my guys just got drafted from CBA,
Oh, very nice.
second and second pick. So after our conversation, I'm gonna send him to the airport.
Very nice. That's awesome.
Cool. Yeah, man.
Congrats.
Cool. So I know we've done this before, but still, like, can you introduce yourself for the audience?
Yeah, of course. So, my name's Erik Huddleston. I am currently an assistant strength coach with the Indiana Pacers and also the director of performance for the Fort Wayne Mad Ants, their G League affiliate. I am about to start my second season with them. Prior to that, I was the director of performance at a private facility called iFast here in Indianapolis. And then before that, I worked at a couple of colleges with on the basketball side with strength and conditioning. So, um, in total, about 6 years of professional work so far.
So, how was the first year of NBA?
It was good. It feels like it never really ended. And I think that that's a good thing in a lot of ways, as this kind of being a transition for me. So, what I mean by that is we were really fortunate. All season with the Pacers didn't go great, and obviously we didn't make the playoffs. What we've had is this really, really clean transition with a lot of younger guys on our team now who want to be here in the off season. And so really, we had 2 weeks right after the season ended off, and then we started having guys back in, and then it's been, continuous summer training with a lot of the guys, a lot of check-ins with guys, and then obviously summer league, ramping up. So it's been I think it's kind of good that we treat this. The goal, obviously, for us as a team is to eventually be playing, deep into June or July, and hopefully a long playoff run. So I think that it's good that we kind of get the guys used to having a short off season. Don't let them think that you know a 3 or 4 month off season is a realistic thing every year, because it shouldn't be a thing for us going forward. So it's been really good.
Cool, man. Love it. So, uh, how is it different from like the previous like college experience?
Yeah. So in college, I think that the reason that I don't think I enjoyed college as much as I do the private side or the professional side, sorry, is that a lot of the times it was kind of a drag for guys to see us. I think that they would see us as punishment or kind of being enforcers or maybe cultural guys that are supposed to, you know, build buzzword stuff like mental toughness or grit or whatever it is. Um, I think at the professional level, you have deeper, more individual relationships with guys than you might in the college setting. In the college setting, things were very, at least in my experience, they were very get in, get out. Everything is bigger, faster, stronger. And here, there's a lot more finesse with the way that you do things. Obviously, the budgets are bigger, so the type of technology that you have access to, the level of athletes that you have access to. I mean, we're talking about the top, 1% of basketball players in the world, and even then, there's a lot of variation between different levels of that 1%. So it is. I find that now there's so much more creative problem solving. There's so much more detail. The staffs are larger in the professional space, and so you can be a little bit more dialed in, because you have all these resources available to the players. So um, the other side of that is that this is their job now. A lot of times there's so many other commitments when working with the college athlete. They've got to schedule, you play games less frequently, you practice a lot more. That's the reverse in the NBA level. You play a lot more than you practice. And so there were a lot of similarities, but I think that there were more differences and similarities at the end of the day.
So, since the players are different and the players' mindset are different, being a performance coach, is there going to be a lot of like times that you have to like really think that like what's going on, or like what should you be programming, that kind of stuff, or it's basically like easy for you?
I wouldn't say that. I would say when you've got a younger team like we do right now, they still need a lot of the same things that you would have when you have a young college athlete. I think the main differences are we have organizational goals that we have set forward for a young player. So if they're a rookie coming in this year and it's a draft pick, theoretically, we have 4 years to develop that player before their next contract is ready to go with us. In the college setting, especially when you're working at the bigger kind of Power 5 schools in college, you don't necessarily have that with your top end athletes. You might get 1 or 2 years with those guys before they decide to move on and go pro. And so at some colleges, you might only have 4 months with a guy by the time he's in the door and out the door. And so you really don't have a lot of time to have a development plan for those players. And I think that's where we're in a good spot this year, is that we are young. We have a lot of pieces that I think are great development pieces moving forward. And that gives us a lot of opportunity to build some of that stuff out and have those plans ready. And obviously, like, having a plan is great, but at the end of the day, it's how you react when things don't go according to plan that I think makes the difference. And, I think our staff is very, very good at kind of identifying, like, we have a very, very experienced staff above me. I think that our director, Sean Wendell, has been there. I think this will be his 18th season. His assistant, Andy, has been there. I think this is his 8th or 9th. Jason below him has been there 7, and then I've been there now 1. So there's a lot of experience there, and so they've seen a lot of. And so I think that what's really cool is we now have a very young team that we're able to put this development plan forward for, but we also have experienced pieces within the staff that is able to anticipate all of the kind of bumps in the road or the problems that could come up, and sort of start thinking about how we might handle those things now. So I think we're in a really good spot in terms of having a lot of experience on the staff side, but also having a very young and very kind of malleable team to deal with going forward.
Cool. Love it, man.
Yeah.
So that's like all for the NBA stuff.
Right.
So next thing I want to discuss is about some of the posts you post on Instagram, which is like really interesting. I really love it.
Cool.
Okay. So the first thing is the post with CMJ.
Okay.
Right. Can you like walk us through like how do like write these notes down, and why do you think these, like the eccentric RFD, or like let me check. Yeah, these kind of stuff down.
Yeah. So I think a lot of the times I kind of go to the notebook stuff when I'm trying to flesh out an idea and kind of see where, as I go through notes, where things take me and where I might contradict myself in a lot of ways, or where some maybe shortcomings in the way that I'm thinking or not filling a gap in right. So I think with the post that you're talking about, the eccentric RFD, where that really came from was a lot of the research right now. When you look at, everybody understands, I think generally everybody understands the importance of the phase of a counter movement jump. So eccentric, I don't know that I love that term, but I understand its usefulness. It is basically the descent of a counter movement jump, so the downward portion. I think that that can get muddied sometimes because people think downward movement is always the eccentric orientation of a muscle. And that can't be true every time, because we would literally fall to the ground if there was only eccentric action that was happening at every muscle across your body. So what you're looking at then are these kind of two distinct but very interrelated phases of the eccentric portion of a counter movement jump. So when we look at force plate numbers, you're looking at the unweighting phase, which is the initial unweighting that happens. It's about the first 30 degrees of hip flexion, give or take. The next phase, I guess, until your counter movement is done, is that braking phase. And so that requires a little bit more concentric muscle activity. You're stopping yourself from going down any further. You have your amortization phase at the bottom where force is zero velocity, and then you have the whole concentric phase going up. So what gets a lot of credit in the research for improving jump height is that braking phase, the one that involves concentric shortening muscle action. What's funny though is when you start to dig through some of the stuff that they say, the concentric or the braking phase of that counter movement jump is a result of an increased ability to unweight. So that those two things have to cancel each other out. The unweighting phase and the braking phase have to equal one, essentially, for you to be able to stop yourself at the bottom of that counter movement and then jump back up. And so you can literally, what we talk about, and I'm going to backtrack out of this question a little bit. The argument a lot of the times is that compensation is a good thing and should be present in movement patterns, because when you work with high-level athletes, if you take away that compensation, you could take away from performance. I do understand that argument. I am supportive of that argument in certain instances. But what if you reduce compensation, so you allow someone more degrees of freedom, you allow them a more forceful is the wrong word. You allow them a more efficient unweighting phase, which is an eccentric orientation, external rotation bias. You give them access to, if they don't have access to 30 degrees of hip flexion, you're not hitting an unweighting phase at all. It's automatically going to involve constant muscle activity. So if you allow them, you take away some compensation, allow them more degrees of freedom at the hip, you could potentially increase their ability to unweight, which then automatically increases the magnitude of their braking phase, which then automatically increases the concentric potential. And so while, yeah, I do think that taking away compensation, making everybody move too freely and having too many degrees of freedom is not a good thing for performance when you're dealing with high-level athletes that need to jump. But there are certain instances where someone is going to have such a restricted range of motion and such a limited ability to unweight that it's going to hurt them in terms of the other eccentric portions of that counter movement jump. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. I also love that you brought up, you said like you don't really like the word eccentric phase instead of like unweighted. I love this.
Yeah. It's not, it can't all be one or the other. I think that's what the language is confusing, because then think about how that translates to a lot of strength coaches who can't like peel back the layers on some of this stuff. When you say this is an eccentric phase, well, how do you improve that? The only answer that they can come up with is eccentric training, and that may not be what that person needs, because they already have the ability to lengthen a muscle under load. What they don't have is the ability to fall into that position or stop themselves at the bottom really efficiently and turn that. Like if the muscle doesn't lengthen at all, you're not getting an eccentric load on an exercise like that.
So instead of like eccentric, you use unweighted, which is more like the word rapid, eccentric, isometric.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's more of the concept you just bring.
I like the term descent when I'm talking about the downward portion of that counter movement. I prefer descent downward because I think that we're talking about the direction of force. If I'm applying force down into the ground, I am moving down. That is more specific to me than eccentric rate of force development is.
Cool. Love it. Love this. So, to be honest, I literally like screenshot all your like notes on your Instagram because there's some words that I had really had to like zoom out, like see what that word means.
Right.
But anyway, love it. Really love it. So next question is same. It's about like asymmetry for like training. Like
Right.
accounting asymmetry with training, right?
Right.
So there are some key points like load, like rate of loading, that kind of stuff.
Right.
Still, can you like walk us through your like thought process?
For sure. So let me start with some basic, like, how do I determine that there's an asymmetry present, right? Let me start there. So outside of the technology that I have available, it's very easy for me to quantify asymmetry on a force plate because I get a printout that says it regardless, right? Like I get a report that is generated that tells me there is this % of difference in my asymmetry on a counter movement job. If I don't have access to those tools, which I didn't for a long time, most of my professional career, I have not had access to force plate metrics. So what I'm looking at then is typically pretty simple table measures for range of motion that tell me, okay, we have a limitation in IR on this side, we have a limitation in ER on this side, we have limited straight leg raise on one side, whatever it is. So when I measure hip internal and external rotation unilaterally, so one side versus the other, let's say that I get limited hip internal rotation on the left side. That typically tells me, or the assumption that I make about that then, is that it's not a restriction in total degrees of freedom. I am starting with a bias towards internal rotation on that side, and that's why the measurement is showing limited to me. So if I'm already starting in the internal rotation position, it's hard for me to go any further into that, but I have a measure that shows me external rotation. So if I start with that understanding that if I'm measuring a limitation, I am probably already in that position or stuck in that position. So limited internal rotation on the left hip. If I've got limited external rotation on the right hip, I can do the same thing. So there's some asymmetry that tell me, okay, I am already stuck in this position. So to counter that, I need to set up the exercise in a way that facilitates movement out of that position. So if we're talking a split squat and we're going to use that left leg forward idea again of being limited in internal rotation, I'm going to set up with whatever load that I've chosen on the outside of that left leg that's forward, because that's going to bias the exercise automatically towards external rotation at that hip. I'm going to set up in a way that says this is going to facilitate moving into external rotation because I'm already setting up in a position to be biased towards internal rotation. Does that help?
Yeah, of course.
So you can account for things where you place load. You can also account for rate of loading stuff. So like you said, some of the kettlebell like drop and catch stuff that I've done, when you do something like that, you're actually slowing the rate of loading down for the individual. So if I was just to pick up a heavy barbell out of the rack and have it on my back, that is instantaneous load. That doesn't allow me a ton of variability in my system up and down, because the load, as soon as I picked it up off the rack and it's heavy, it's on me and it doesn't change top to bottom the entire time that I do the lift. Where if I'm going to do some accommodating resistance or assistance exercises, the weight is variable and changes, and then I'm able to slow the rate of loading by dropping and catching a kettlebell. So as I go down, as my hands touch the kettlebell again, that's slowly adding on. It looks fast in terms of the movement, but it's actually slowing down how quickly the weight is being added to my tissues. And so I'm able to distribute that a little bit more evenly if that's something that I have a problem with.
So if, let's say you just mentioned like a person is limited on the ER on
Mm-hmm.
the left side,
Mm-hmm.
and his right side is ER limited.
Yeah, right side ER limited, left side's IR limited.
Yeah, sorry.
You're good.
So if we're gonna put the right leg in front on the front side and do a split squat, are we gonna put him into a more of a IR position? IR position.
Exactly. So literally on this exercise, this is what's easy to coach about this, is if you take that example, when my left foot was forward, weight was in my left hand. I literally can just switch sides with my legs and keep the weight in my left hand the entire time. And now I'm accounting for both sides. So the athlete's not having to think, okay, do I switch hands here? Do I switch hands here? It's just staying on their left hand. So it makes things a little bit easier because now, and that's only, again, if you only have those two very kind of simple examples of that, but like it does help you facilitate on both sides, and it makes it, honestly, it's not very difficult to coach when you have some, okay, just keep it in your left hand the whole time.
And it makes sense because like our body is asymmetry at the first place, man.
Right.
Yeah,
It's always there's always going to be some level of it, and obviously the research says, for athletes you want less than 10% to kind of avoid injury. I think that kind of across professional sport is a goal to have, but we understand that it's always going to be there. It's almost never going to be zero, and if it's zero, it probably doesn't stay like that for very long. It might be a test to have something like that. So for sure,
it's like the podcast I did with Logan Jones, which is a performance coach on Arizona Diamondback. He also mentioned like that if we're gonna chase symmetry all the time, it's not possible.
No.
Yeah.
Especially a sport like baseball, right? Like they are turning one direction all the time. Like if I'm a right-handed pitcher, I'm turning to the left time after time. Same with basketball, honestly. Like you watch players step into their jump shot, right? They always lead with the same leg if it's coming off. They're always shooting with the same hand. Like you're never going to chase that stuff out, especially with the type of schedule we have. Like you're just never going to have enough time to tease that stuff out. They're never taking a break from basketball in general. So, I mean, if for anybody who's trying to make that number zero, good luck.
So it's just kind of like the way you mentioned, or it just kind of like fix it. Not really fix it, but it's kind of like it helps.
Right.
Yeah. Love it.
It's just trying to, I think we try to account for as much as we can. We try to be as dialed in as possible and control what we can control in the weight room, because we know that when they go on the basketball court, we have no say in what they're doing. There's no control over how their movement goes or anything like that. So we try to have it be as structured and as personalized, individualized for each person as possible.
Cool. Love this.
Yeah,
so the next question is also from Instagram about like off-season vertical integration.
Yeah.
There's like 5 days of these.
I love that. Yeah. We had a great, we had like a mini staff in service today where we talked about a lot of this stuff. So I have good practice already.
Cool. So since it's like vertical integration? Why is there like different theme for like different days, and how do you program this?
Yeah. So obviously it depends on an individual, and I can't give a ton of individual details when you're talking about, professional athletes, but how I like to set this up, if we have a full 5 days of training in the off season, this can vary, right? Like we do as little as 3 basically, but 5 being the optimal, because kind of the stuff off the court should be taking precedence right now. If we have 5 days, the Charlie Francis model of vertical integration is going to be determining the kind of most important qualities of athleticism, or whatever it is in your and then having a main focus on each day, but making sure that we're touching on everything from a global perspective at least one time a week. Or there's a breakdown, I don't have it in front of me, but there's a breakdown of like degradation of skill. So basically how neurally involved something is. So something like sprinting or change of direction stuff, that takes a lot of focus to do, and a lot of energy from you when you do it. Something like that is going to decline in terms of skill more quickly than something like long aerobic capacity that is slow and duration, doesn't take a lot of effort to do, doesn't take a lot of neural power to do something like that. So basically how I have it set up at this point, this changes person to person, but day 1 might be vertical force production or vertical force acceptance, depending on what kind of end of the spectrum we're looking at with that player and where the focus needs to be. Day 2 would then be a little bit of a change of direction day. So we're working not only on like speed and agility stuff, but also their ability to get into and out of a cut. So we start to focus more on that ER/IR motion that happens at their hip or at their sacrum or thorax, whatever it is. Day 3 would then be a horizontal force production or acceptance day. So you think acceleration, deceleration. You're looking for a little bit more sacronutation, so you're driving, a more what's the word I'm looking for? You're looking for a more positive shin angle or anterior translation of the tibia. That's what I'm looking for. So now we're working on some D-cell stuff, some A-cell stuff. Day 4 then in this 5-day example would be a mostly isometric day, or we call it tissue health, tendon quality type stuff. And so that's where we're getting into a lot of this preseason now protocols for making sure that we're loading guys' tendons, getting their tendinopathy taken care of, making sure that everyone feels good. And those can go into deeper ranges as we build up towards the season. And then the 5th day would be a work capacity day. So a really high work to rest ratio, higher volume sets, little rest, and then kind of moderate to low weight on some of that stuff, just to kind of finish them out for the week. So those are kind of just the qualities that I picked. I thought that those were the most overarching. I thought that would allow me the most amount of individualization in terms of programming. And it gives me, when you're that focused on a day, now we might have 9 exercises in that day, and we can be really, really dialed in on what we do. We can be really dialed in with our approach from a loading standpoint. We can be dialed in from our approach in terms of how we manage guys' asymmetries, how we teach. I mean, this is a big thing, because if everything has a recurring theme throughout the workout, then now I'm having to spend less time teaching each time, because they see the overlapping themes each day. If we're getting out of a hip on the right side on our change of direction day, then we might start with a wall kind of, press into the wall where they're loading that hip. We could bounce that out. The next exercise right below it would be like a lateral lunge, and then we can go into like a step into a med ball put. And so you build those things out, And then you have to spend less time saying things to each athlete, because now they get a feel for what this position feels like in a static way, what this feels like when you add a little bit of momentum to it, and then what's the most dynamic version of this movement that that athlete can do with really high quality. So I like to set it up that way. That way your ABC exercises all kind of tier on top of one another, and then they're able to see the transfer from what, you know, the initial exercise is pretty static and just gives them a good sensation, to what's it look like and what's it feel like when it's really, really fast and things are a little bit more chaotic.
Cool. So, before you enter the like pro setting, you're more in a private setting, and like you mentioned, there's like not really much like being able to access like force plate, that technology, that kind of stuff. So
Right.
before all the technology, or before all these like cool stuff,
Right.
they're gonna be able to. So before these, how do you like see like things like we mentioned, like the unweighted phase or like the asymmetry, or how do you program for the training?
Right. So a lot of the time with that, it just came down to figuring out, and I was lucky because I had a lot of people around me that did a really good job of basically, I walked into a situation where I inherited a lot of the practices of the people around me who had been doing a really good job without a lot of the tech stuff for a long time. So our standard type of assessment when I would work with a new athlete would be the same table measures that I still do now. So having a good understanding of where their limitations are, and then being able to make some correlations on, you know, a lot of it is going to be subjective eye test stuff that I can see a little bit of what's going on, but a lot of it also was the same stuff that I said earlier with the hip range of motion stuff, or the shoulder range of motion stuff, and seeing, okay, this typically, and I had to make a lot of correlations between things, like this typically means that this athlete is going to be deficient in this. And so I would test that stuff on the table with their range of motion. I might go out and do an intervention with them. So I might give them in kind of, you know, therapy language, I might give them reset exercises, or I might give them, you know, a couple small exercises to do on the table. I get them on their feet and start to load them asymmetrically and see kind of how they respond. But then I can get them right back on the table during that assessment and see if the exercise that we chose, that was kind of what I was thinking about, you know, why they were moving that way. If that exercise helped in any way, then it kind of reaffirmed my thought process on something like that. And then I just had to go ahead and you know, keep seeing them on a regular basis, keep making sure that they were making progress in that stuff. But really, it's a long way of saying that it was just test and then intervene and then retest, and making sure that the things that I held as KPIs for them, which was typically table measure stuff, or maybe it was feeling, you know, they were symptom free after we did this kind of exercise, or whatever it was making sure that there was a high level of communication between me and the person that I was working with, and then making sure that I was frequently retesting and making sure that we were heading in the right direction.
So do you think that these kind of experience, I mean, without the tech, help you like now with when you're dealing with like professional athletes right now?
For sure. And I think that the most important part about that is that having a really while we do have access to a lot of technology, what you don't want is to use it as a crutch constantly to answer your problems. There has to be some human element there. There has to be the ability. And I think what I do, if I'm going to pat myself on the back about something, I think I have a good eye for movement. And I think I have an understanding of, if it looks like this, and I don't like that, and I want it to look like this, I have an understanding of, a couple of steps on how to get me there, how to get me towards making it look like what I want it to look like. And I think that a lot of coaches could benefit just from reps. It's as easy as making sure that you're being, you're watching your athlete when they do things, and that when you do make small tweaks, that you see how the response is to it. Or I think a lot of times we're really good at asking why an intervention that we do doesn't work, but we're not as good about reevaluating why an intervention did work. Like still questioning why, because I could think that it was one thing that I was doing, but in reality, it could have been these 3 or 4 other things that I didn't think even played a factor in the outcome. Good. And so, yeah, I think that it definitely, having limited resources in the private sector made me be creative in terms of my problem solving, helped me to figure out like best practices in a lot of environments, because when you have such a limited time with each athlete like I do, you want to be as dialed in and as effective as possible during that time. And if they're in pain and you don't make a change for the day, then there's a possibility that they're not going to play in that practice, or they're not going to play in that game. And so you're looking to have as much impact over their movement quality or the way that they feel or their performance metrics as possible.
What this summer I kind of like did a lot of like interview or like podcasts with some of the NBA strength coaches or like performance coaches, and the thing they all have in common is like, although they have a lot of like resources to the tech, no matter it's like force play, velocity based training, any cool stuff they have, they usually I mean, at the end of the day, they more bias on like their coaching eye, their experience, and what they are thinking. I mean, what is in their heads, instead of like just looking at the data and see what we're doing right now.
Right. You can't ignore the human element of this, is that we are dealing with, while everybody on our team plays basketball and is really, really good at basketball, they don't all move the same way. They don't all have the same responses to certain training stimulus. They don't all have the same, I can have 2 athletes that look very, very different in person and on the court, and they have the same numbers on a print when I collect data. So it is interesting. And I think that also like our biases, people act like when you collect data on a force plate or, whatever metric that we're using, when you collect that stuff, that it is without bias. And it can't be. It can't be impartial, because we are still viewing it through a lens of our biases. I have my own experiences that are different from the other 3 strength coaches that we have here. And so when I look at something and when I read something off a report, my interpretation of that information is different than the other 3 coaches that are here, and it should be. And so, yeah, technology can't replace the human element of this is what I see. These were the changes that were made from an athlete standpoint. If they feel like they are moving better, if they feel like they are more explosive, if they feel like they're getting in and out of a cut quicker, or if they're doing a hip turn, they're able to flip their hips, cut somebody off and get a stop on defense and stay in front of somebody. If they feel that, but there's not numbers behind it that support it, how do I deny that? I can't deny that.
So, the way I see it is like, the human perspective, the things we talk about is probably the reason why these coaches, like you, or like the other like coaches I talk, is great. I mean, just like you mentioned, we can't always chase a number, and even with the same number, it probably meant different with different athletes, and they all move differently.
Right. Yeah, you can't ignore You can't ignore how variable people are and how different they can be day to day. And, you know, the timing of testing has a big deal to do with that. Like some guys, they're just not going to test good the day after a game. They're you know, that's not their thing, or whether it's pregame or whatever it is. And so understanding how there should be variance from athlete to athlete in the time that you do things. And just, again, you said it best. It's just understanding that you can't ignore people and replace people with data and have that make all your decisions for you. It should be supportive of the interventions that you're doing. It should, you know, it should help you make a decision or help you, you know, help you identify a problem, but it is not the decision or the problem.
Yeah, like, love this. So last question, last topic before I let you go. I really want to like finish this because this post is before you posted before our last conversation, and also I also screenshot that, but I'll just like zoom out.
Yeah.
So the post is like how to balance the micro level of health and performance continuum.
Okay.
Like, yeah, so can you like walk me through the process?
I'm trying to remember which one you're talking about now because it's been a while since we've talked. What's the pic? Would you know what the picture looks like?
It's like a continuum from left side to like the right side. Yeah. Yeah.
So, oh my gosh, where do I start with that? Going back a little bit to the beginning of this when we talked about eliminating compensation and what effect that can have. I think that a lot of the times when we look at training or we look at, like, you know, where our emphasis lies in a certain lift or in a certain training session in general, we start to ignore how overlapping these two qualities are. It's the same conversation that we've had before about like energy systems, right? We all can identify energy systems and, you know, what specific drills or what specific modalities are going to target each individual energy system without understanding that all of them, they don't work in isolation. They're overlapping all the time. You're never just training one energy system. You're never just training health or performance. I think that there's a really smart way of doing all of those things at the same time. It's just being balanced in the way that you view things, the way that you account for the variables that we can control when we're setting up an exercise. So, you know, what the load is, where the load is, the time under tension, the way that you limit depth, because maybe they don't have, on a split squat, they don't have enough hip flexion on one side to get all the way down to the ground in a split squat. So you limit the depth, or you have them squat to a box. And so you have a lot of control over even the breathing in a rep. Like, you have control over that stuff. And so when you implement that in a really dialed in and pay attention to the details of how you coach that for somebody, I think that you get a benefit out of health and performance. And I think that you can look at some reset exercises and say, okay, they're ground-based, so, you know, they're not very active. They're doing breathing during it. It looks very yoga-y. But in reality, if you are eliminating some of that compensation that's reducing their ability to get into an unweighting phase, or you're reducing their ability to get into ER at the first 30 degrees of hip flexion, you could limit their actual force production. You can limit their jump height. So those two things aren't mutually exclusive. And I think that if you raise the ceiling for one, if you raise the ceiling for their ability to get in and out of compensation, then you raise their ability to produce force on the other end, and you increase their outputs. And so I think you know who Corey Schlesinger is, the strength coach for the Phoenix Suns, bald guy with a red beard. He does he describes this kind of stuff as like inputs versus outputs. So, absorbing force or redirecting force, into the ground versus producing force and getting away from the ground. And I think that those two things, like the way you coach an exercise, I think we usually look at it as just getting away from the floor. It's not really necessarily going into the squats, coming out of the squat. That's the important part. The way that you construct those exercises and really put that stuff, set the parameters of what you allow an athlete to do in that exercise, can have a benefit on both ends.
Cool.
Did I answer? Okay?
Yeah. I love this. I love our conversation.
Cool.
So, for those like coaches who are like, really want to get into like professional teams, like, no matter if it's like NBA or NFL, from your experience, is there anything like you want? Is there anything like you can say to them?
Yeah, for sure. I think that a lot of teams now are looking to add pieces to their staff that do things that they don't already do. So this is really true of just athletes in general as well. So, the thing that they kind of say about NBA players is you can do everything okay and you might have an okay career, but if you do one thing really well, you're going to have a pretty good career and you're going to be around for a long time. And so I think the same is true for our profession. Is if you do data analytics, kind of the integrative sports performance model stuff, if you do that really well and you have a different way of applying that is valuable to a staff that they don't already have, they're going to look at hiring you. I think that if you see movement in a certain way, or you think outside of the box, or you've had success with athletes and maybe you do things a little bit differently, but you do it at a really high level, and they can tell you put a lot of thought into that, and they can tell that you take into consideration all of the kind of factors that go both for and against your way of thinking. I think that teams more often than not are going to look at you for something like that. I mean, obviously the not sexy answer of this is that it's just about who you know, and there is some truth to that. Like it is a very relationship based business as much as I think that kind of hurts sometimes the fundamentalist strength coaches to think that this is more about your relationships with people than it is about your actual technical skill. It is sometimes. I think that the more athlete buy-in you have with your style of training, maybe you're not the most personable in the world, or you're not, the life of the party. That's true of me. I was never like a real exuberant, bubbly personality, but I think they can tell that I care about what they're doing. They can tell that I've put a lot of thought into what I do with them, and that I don't have an ego involved in this. Like I'm not so married to an exercise that I came up with, or so stuck in my own ways that I can't admit when I'm wrong to an athlete, or that this isn't the right exercise, let's move to this instead, or this is my fault, let's change this right now. So I think that having a little bit of humility in what you do, but also being able to talk about what you do, that's why this is important. This is good practice for me to be able to explain what I do on a regular basis, because it's easy to get lost in the day-to-day. I do a lot of things over and over and over again, and my days are similar at some points. And so to be able to talk about what I do and explain it to someone who hasn't been in our facility and hasn't been around our players before, that's important for me. That's a good skill to practice. So in general, do what you do at a really, really high level. I love this. I had a conversation with Jesse Green, who's the sports science, performance and sports science director for the Sacramento Kings. He said he wanted a really T-shaped approach to how he hires people and what the continuing education process looks like. And so when you look at like a capital T, you have kind of a broad understanding of a lot of things, and you have one really deep understanding of one specialty area or one thing that you do really, really well. I need to, for my staff, I need to be able to talk to our physical therapists, talk to our athletic trainers, talk to our player development coaches, and I need to be able to speak all of those languages at a decent level. I'm not coaching basketball, right? So I'm not on the court, showing guys how to dribble or shoot, because that would be awful. But I have an understanding of what those movements look like and what, where they need to progress to. I'm not a physical therapist, but I have an understanding of what they do on the table and a general understanding of when we have a conversation, where making sure that we're being supportive of what they're doing on the table also. But I think that I have a really deep understanding of some of this physiological stuff and some of the ways that we look at movement and apply certain exercises. And so if that's what I do really well and that's what I provide to the table, I think that's what I got hired. And the same for everybody else that looks to get into this. Be really, really good at something and also be able to kind of talk about all the other stuff.
Good. Cool. Appreciate it, man.
Of course. Yeah, this was fun.
So for those coaches who are interested in what we're talking about today, where can they reach out to you?
Yeah, so I am less active on Instagram than I used to be. Just work schedule stuff and trying not to be on my screen all the time. This is a good place though if you want to direct message me on here. I don't know if they can see it, but it's eph.24. That's my Instagram handle. Also, they can always email me, Erik, ERIKHUDD @gmail.com. And I'm usually pretty good about getting back on that one also.
Oh, so email is better?
Either one works, honestly. Email I check pretty frequently. The phone, it depends on the day. It's just if I'm not too busy and I'm not doing anything else productive. So
cool. Appreciate for your time, man. I know you got really busy.
Awesome, Erik. Yeah, I appreciate that. This was fun. We'll have to do this again soon.
Yeah, you too. Have a nice day, okay?
Appreciate it, man. You too.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.